There's finally some substantial hockey news in the midst of August, and it involves one of, if not the biggest market in the league. And that news is that John Tavares is to be stripped of the captaincy for Auston Matthews to take over for the start of the 2024-2025 season and then beyond. Now, Tavares has been captain pretty much ever since he was signed to that monster 7-year, $77 million deal back in 2018. He was given the captaincy after just his first full year with the team, and he's led them ever since. And it's pretty understandable for Tavares to get the captaincy. I mean, he was a veteran coming into a young team that had a young core, and they were looking to be contenders for several years to come. At the time, Matthews was just 22 years old, Morgan Rielly was 25, Marner was 22, and Willie Nylander was 23. So the 28-year-old Tavares was brought in to try and lead this team to glory. And this isn't at all uncommon. A lot of the time when you have a young team, you have a little bit of an older captain, maybe more experienced, to try and mold these kids into good players and leaders. But this probably wasn't the initial plan. I'm sure the initial plan was for Matthews to become captain instead of Tavares back in 2019. But Matthews got a disorderly conduct charge in the summer of 2019 after doing some questionable things in front of a security guard. I mean, it would be the most Toronto thing to do if they did name him captain after all that, but it did go to Tavares. And obviously, it hasn't gone exactly how they wanted. The Leafs have just won one playoff series in the Tavares era and just one game in the second round. Year after year, it was the same thing, losing in 6 or 7 in a somehow more embarrassing way than the previous year. And after every playoff loss, fans of Toronto expected a change. Not a small change like bringing in some bottom 6 forward, but a big change like getting rid of one of the core 4 of Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares. And for the past few years, both Nylander's and Marner's names have been tied down to trade rumors, but obviously there's been no movement on any of those. After Toronto's Game 7 loss to Boston this past postseason, the senior members of the organization vowed to consider every potential avenue to alter the team's dynamic. This announcement capped off an offseason where the Leafs have seen some pretty big changes. Craig Berube is now the new head coach, replacing Sheldon Keefe, and the team has bolstered its blue line by signing Chris Tanev and OEL. But more changes were expected. Like I said, perhaps maybe a big shift in the core 4. I remember sometime in the beginning of the offseason, there were some heavy rumors that had Mitch Marner going to the Utah Hockey Club. But just like every big rumor in the NHL, it carried no weight, and fans were left disappointed after no move came. The big change they were talking about was naming Auston Matthews captain, replacing Toronto native John Tavares. The reaction from the fans and media was pretty split. Some people thought that Tavares would be captain until the end of his contract, which just has another year left, which would make sense considering it would lead to a clean transition to Matthews whether or not Tavares resigns with the team. Others really like the move and think it makes sense considering the current state of the team and the fact that they have a fresh new coach coming in. It also gives Matthews a year to kind of lean on Tavares' shoulder for help so that if he doesn't re-sign with the team next year, Matthews still could have gotten some help and guidance from the former captain on how to lead a team and how to deal with that awful Toronto media. And obviously, I'm not in the Leafs locker room, and Matthews seems like a good pick for captain. But over the years, I've seen a lot of Leafs fans come out and say that they would have liked Morgan Rielly over Tavares as captain. He's the longest tenured Leaf, being with the organization since 2012 and then making the step to the NHL in 2013, and ever since then, he's been the team's #1 guy on the back end. I don't follow the Leafs too closely, but from what I've heard from the fans, he's the heart of the team, and really the only one outside maybe a few guys who really steps up their game come playoff time. Just look at this year's recent 7-game exit to Boston. Matthews had just 1 goal in 5 games after putting up nearly 70 in the regular season. Marner had just 3 points in 7 games after a regular season that saw him put up 85 points in 69 games, which is a 101-point pace. Nylander had just 3 points in the 4 games he played after a career-high 98 points, and then the captain, John Tavares, put up just 2 points in the entire 7-game series. Now, it's hard to compare since Rielly's a defenseman, but he was logging 25 minutes a night and was on the ice for just 5 goals against. And the playoffs is really where you need your captain to step up and lead the team by example. Putting up 2 points in a 7-game series against your divisional rival who you have a history against isn't a great example to set. And I am not by any means calling out Auston Matthews here. Sure, he's had some pretty underwhelming playoff runs throughout his career, but it's not like he doesn't show up at all. And the regular season is a completely different story. If you want someone to lead by example on the ice, there are few players who can do it better than Matthews. For one, he's a perennial 40-goal scorer, hitting that mark in all but 2 seasons in his career, and honestly, he's probably going to turn into a perennial 50 to 60-goal scorer. He's hit 60 in 2 of the last 3 seasons, and the season he didn't hit the 60 goal mark, he still scored 40, which was considered a down year for him, which is absolutely nuts. So going into every year, you know Matthews is going to at least be in the conversation for both the Hart and the Rocket. And it really doesn't just stop at his offensive game, because he's actually a very underrated defensive player. The past 5 seasons, he's had consistent votes for the Selke for the best defensive forward in the league, and pretty much his entire career he's been up there for the Lady Byng, which is awarded to the player who exhibits the best sportsmanship, which I think is really the #1 quality that you want in a captain. Sure, you want him to put up good offensive numbers and lead on the ice, but when it comes to talking to the refs about a penalty or a disallowed goal, having a respectable and well-liked player is very advantageous. Matthews also just signed the largest contract in NHL history in terms of average annual value, making $13.25 million per year, which will kick in at the start of this year. So, new coach, new contract for the new captain, Auston Matthews. But this does raise some concern for the Leafs. I'm sure that a lot of the Leafs fans and even the Leafs management wanted to lock down Matthews for 7 or 8 years, not 4. Now, a 4-year deal isn't exactly a bridge deal, but it doesn't cover Matthews' prime. At the end of the deal, Matthews will be 30 years old, still most definitely in his prime, which only means he'll be due for yet another payday. His first big contract, outside his ELC, was signed in 2019 and was a 5-year deal paying him $11.6 million a year. And now he's signed a 4-year deal, and at the end of this one, with the inflation of the NHL contracts, I'm sure he'll sign a new contract worth even more than what he's making now. So I'm sure that the Leafs are going to try and keep him by any means possible. I mean, he's arguably the greatest Leaf to put the jersey on, and he's one of the greatest goal scorers of our generation. But if they continue to keep Nylander and Marner around until then, they're going to be tight up against the cap yet again with re-signing Matthews and both Nylander and Marner. Nylander's contract is up at the same time as Matthews' extension is over, and Marner is done after next season. So they really have to hope that they get something done in this short 4-year window where they have at least Nylander and Matthews, hopefully Marner. It's pretty uncommon for a team to strip a player of captaincy, give it to someone else, and then have their former captain still stay on the team. However, it does happen, and when it does, it often puts the team in hot water. The Sharks actually have a weird history of doing this, especially in the 21st century. In 2003, Patrick Marleau became the captain of the San Jose Sharks, and this came after a pretty abysmal year where they missed the playoffs, so they needed a change. The first year under Marleau as captain, they made it all the way to the conference finals. After that came 3 consecutive second-round exits, followed by a first-round exit, which led the Sharks front office to strip Marleau of the captaincy. They then gave it to veteran Rob Blake, who led them to the conference finals yet again, but then retired after the season concluded. This left another hole in the leadership position, and San Jose turned to 31-year-old Joe Thornton. Joe led them back to the conference finals in his first year, but after that, it was followed by first and second round losses that led to yet another change in leadership. This caused some hostility between Thornton and GM Doug Wilson. The Sharks then went a year without a captain and then named Joe Pavelski the captain of the team, giving both Marleau and Thornton the alternates. This is definitely one of the stranger scenarios with the captain getting stripped of the seat because, well, it happened twice in a row with Marleau and Thornton. It also happened in 2016 with Dustin Brown and the LA Kings, after Brown was stripped of it and it was given to Anze Kopitar. Brown voiced his displeasure, saying he pretty much built the team from a bottom feeder to the champions, and he's not really wrong. And I don't think a few years of playoff disappointment after a bunch of success warrants a change of captaincy. And most recently, it happened in Winnipeg, where they stripped Blake Wheeler of the captaincy in 2022, which was a surprise for him. But they were trying to move on from him. I mean, he did leave the team just a year later, so it sort of made sense. So it's kind of 50-50 whether or not this goes the right way, and it seems as though Toronto did this the right way. Tavares was at the press conference where they announced Matthews as captain, and it seemed to go over well. Tavares talked, and it all seemed fine. But is this really going to change anything for the Leafs? My guess is probably not. This seems like a case where they're just shuffling the chairs on the Titanic, trying to stop it from sinking, right? It's small change for a problem that requires a big change. And that big change, as I've mentioned before and many others have, is shipping out one of the core 4. Many thought it'd be Marner this offseason, but like every other offseason, the Leafs did next to nothing. So this change isn't going to really physically change the teams. The lines are going to be the same, the roster is pretty much going to be the same, just 2 players are going to switch patches on their jerseys. But maybe it does change the team mentally. A shift in captaincy can send a message to the team, but if I were to bet, I'd put money on the Leafs having yet another disappointing season. Now, I'm not a Leafs hater by any means. I actually want to see them succeed, but I just don't think this is the change that's necessary for them to finally get over that first round hump. But who knows, maybe I'll eat my words in 10 months. I guess all we can do is wait for the season to start and see if this was the right move, or just another chapter in the Leafs' sad ongoing saga.